Now, when most people think about the British Empire, they usually tend to focus on one of two periods. The period between about 1750 and 1850, which saw the British conquer basically everything that isn't nailed down, or the period in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, where Britain ruled over literally a quarter of the world's landmass and a quarter of the world's population. But the story of the British Empire didn't start with the 7 Years' War or Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. It actually started back in 1066 with an invasion. The year is 1066, and the place is, well, pretty much all of it. England, France, Italy, Northern Africa, and the Iberian Peninsula are all locked in a complicated dance of overlapping claims and counterclaims under the overarching umbrella of the Holy Roman Empire. Meanwhile, across the Channel, the Duke of Normandy has just died, leaving his duchy to his son, a guy who would come to be known as William the Conqueror. And it is this man who kicks off our story today. See, when William took the throne of Normandy, he learned that the good people of England thought that the throne of Normandy was rightfully his by marriage. See, William's uncle, Edward the Confessor, had died childless, and the English thought that Edward had promised his throne to William, but turns out he hadn't. And so when Harold Godwinson, Earl of Wessex, took the throne instead, William was like, "Hey, that's my birthright," and began planning an invasion. Now, there were a few other problems in the region at the time, like, for example, a rebellion in northern England, which William conveniently put down while he was raising his army. And then there was the matter of King Philip I of France, who was also claiming parts of William's Normandy, which William needed to sort out before he could set his sights on England. So after dealing with those two rebellions, William set sail from Normandy with his army and began pillaging the English coast, until finally, on October 14th, 1066, the English and Normans met in battle near the town of Hastings. The resulting Battle of Hastings was a long and bloody affair, but ultimately ended in Norman victory and the death of King Harold II of England. And so, in December of 1066, William the Conqueror was crowned King of England. He took the throne of a thoroughly defeated kingdom, conquered through war and maintained through the building of castles, and thus began the era of Norman rule in England. As conquerors often do, the Normans changed a lot of things in England. They replaced many of the English nobility with Norman lords, set about changing the legal system to make it more in line with Norman practices, and even began constructing great castles all over the countryside to remind everyone of who was now in charge. However, the thing that perhaps they're most famous for today is the introduction of a new language into England. Since William the Conqueror was the ruler of Normandy, which at the time spoke a language descended from Old French, and since William and his nobles were now in charge of England, their language became the language of the courts and aristocracy. Over time, this evolved into something called Middle English, a mix of Old English and Old French that eventually gave way to the modern English we speak today. In fact, the very word empire is derived from the Latin translation of the word imperium, which was used by the Romans to describe their far-flung domains, and was later adopted by the Normans and then the English. So it is in part thanks to the Norman Conquest that today we can talk about empires in the first place. But anyway, after William the Conqueror kicked the bucket in 1087, the English crown passed to his son, William Rufus, followed by his other son, Henry I, both of whom did very little to expand England's territory, though Henry I did get into a massive disagreement with King David I of Scotland about the border territory of Northumberland. Then, in 1135, Henry I died, leaving the throne to his daughter, Empress Matilda, much to the chagrin of her cousin, Stephen of Blois. Stephen seized the throne for himself and launched a civil war that lasted from 1139 to 1154. Eventually, the war came to an end with the Treaty of Wallingford, which confirmed Matilda's son, Henry II's claim to the throne. Henry II was the first true Plantagenet King of England, and he would go on to become the first King of England to rule over a truly coherent empire. You see, when Henry II came to power, England looked like this. It had expanded into southwest Wales, had conquered Ireland, held territories in northern and southern France, and even had a small foothold in the exotic lands of the Byzantine Empire. And while Henry II was able to hold on to all of these holdings, it was his son, Richard the Lionheart, who really expanded the scope of the English crown. Richard, you see, had inherited his father's duchy of Aquitaine, which included the city of Jerusalem, and so inherited a claim to the throne of the Crusader Kingdom of England. And so, in 1189, when the Zionist king, Guy of Lusignan, was deposed by Saladin, Richard went on crusade, recaptured Jerusalem, and retook the throne for the Zionists. Unfortunately, while Richard was away, his older brother, King John Lackland, lost half of Normandy to Philip II of France, something which Richard would have never allowed to happen had he been there. But despite losing a bunch of territory in France, by the end of Richard's reign, England controlled Ireland, large parts of France and the Holy Land, making it, depending on how you define the term, an empire. Although the Anglo-Saxons had invaded and settled in Britain from what is today northwest Germany and Denmark, it was the Romans who first established a province in the island called Britannia. After the Romans left, the native Britons retreated to the west and the north, leaving the fertile lands of central and eastern Britain open for the taking. In the mid-5th century, two Germanic groups, the Angles and the Saxons, began to settle in these areas, and over the next few centuries they subjugated most of the native Britons. These people who conquered central and northern Britain are the so-called Anglo-Saxons, although recent research suggests that the native Britons also played an important role in the culture and society of the period. As such, many scholars prefer the term Anglo-Saxons to describe the people of this time. As the Anglo-Saxons settled into their new home, they established a number of independent kingdoms. The two most powerful of these early kingdoms were Northumbria in the north and Mercia in the south. By the late 700s, however, control of Mercia had fallen into the hands of Offa, king of Mercia, from 757 to 796. During his reign, he greatly expanded Mercian power and influence, even invading and conquering northern parts of England. After Offa's death, the Mercians appointed a king named Cenric, who reigned from 796 to 821. Under Cenric's rule, Mercia reached the peak of its power. Meanwhile, across the River Severn, the kingdom of Northumbria was experiencing its own internal strife. Following the deposition of King Alstan in 796, Northumbria was ruled by a series of 5 kings in just 40 years. In 802, King Egbert of Northumbria sought help from the Mercian king Cenric to secure his throne against a rival claimant. In exchange for military aid, Egbert ceded control of the Northumbrian province of the Danelaw to Cenric, thereby greatly expanding Mercian power and influence. This act essentially ended Northumbria as a viable power in the region. The tide would soon turn, however, with the accession of a brilliant Mercian king named Egbert in 802. Initially coming to power as a subordinate to the overlords of Mercia, Egbert would soon assert his independence and unify much of Britain under his banner. Taking advantage of the decline of Mercia following the death of King Cenric, Egbert led his army into northern England and reconquered the Danelaw, thereby reuniting Northumbria with the English crown. From there, he turned his attention to the southwest, where he defeated the West Saxons at the Battle of Ashdown in 825 and incorporated their kingdom into his growing empire. With the West Saxons subdued, Egbert turned his attention to the remaining independent kingdoms of Wales and Scotland. Although he was unable to subdue them, he did force them to recognize him as overlord. In 829, Egbert convened a council of nobles at the town of Mercaton, where he divided his kingdom among his 3 sons. The division of the kingdom was intended to be a temporary measure, lasting only until Egbert's youngest son came of age. In reality, however, this division would last for nearly 2 centuries. Egbert's sons would each go on to establish their own dynasties, ruling over their respective territories with more or less autonomy. Egbert's eldest son, Aethelstan, inherited Northumbria and the Danelaw, while his second son, Eadwulf, inherited Mercia. Eadwulf proved to be an able administrator, expanding Mercia's power through diplomacy and marriage alliances. He also successfully defended his kingdom against Viking raids. Upon his death in 855, Eadwulf's son, Penda, inherited the throne of Mercia. Like his father, Penda was a skilled politician and diplomat. In 856, he brokered a peace treaty between his brother, King Aethelstan of Wessex, and the Vikings, securing Mercia's northwestern border. Aethelstan's son, Edward the Elder, came to power in 871. His reign saw the rise of Viking incursions into England. Edward spent much of his reign defending his kingdom against the Vikings and consolidating his power over the English nobles. One of his greatest achievements was the establishment of a strong royal court at Winchester. In 886, Edward defeated a Viking fleet in the Battle of the River Otham, ending the Viking threat to England. Following the battle, Edward campaigned throughout England, subjugating the independent Welsh kingdoms and bringing them under Mercian rule. Edward's campaign into Wales brought him into conflict with the kingdom of Strathclyde, located in the far northwest of Britain. In 892, he campaigned into Strathclyde, sacking and destroying the capital at Alclud. Edward's campaigns in Wales and his victory over the Vikings established him as the dominant power in England. However, his success was not without its costs. To finance his wars, Edward raised taxes and imposed a number of other economic burdens on the English nobility. This caused a great deal of resentment, particularly in Wessex, where the burden fell most heavily. Upon Edward's death in 924, the nobles of Wessex deposed his son, Aethelstan, and proclaimed Edward's grandson, Edmund, King of Wessex. The deposition of Aethelstan and the accession of Edmund marked the end of the Kingdom of England and the beginning of the modern English monarchy. The following year, Edmund led a coalition of English nobles into battle against the forces of Mercia and Northumbria. The resulting battle, known as the Battle of the River Tet, was a decisive victory for Edmund, who was killed in the fighting. Following Edmund's death, his brother Edred inherited the throne of England. Edred faced a number of challenges during his reign, including a renewed Viking invasion of England and a rebellion in Wales. Despite these challenges, Edred was able to maintain control of England and expand English power into northern Wales. In 946, Edred's son, Edwy, inherited the throne of England. Unlike his predecessors, Edwy was more interested in the arts and learning than in warfare and politics. As such, he left the day-to-day administration of his kingdom to his counselors. One of Edwy's greatest contributions to English history was the establishment of a royal mint at Winchester, which produced the first English coins. In 955, Edwy was succeeded by his brother, Edgar. Edgar inherited a kingdom that was more stable and prosperous than any that had come before it. He spent much of his reign consolidating his power and extending English control over the Welsh kingdoms. Edgar was also responsible for the construction of a number of important buildings, including the first stone church in England, St. Mary's Church in Winchester. Edgar's son, Edward the Martyr, inherited the throne of England in 975. Edward's reign was a turbulent one. He faced a number of challenges, including a rebellion in Mercia, a Viking invasion of northern England, and a civil war in Wessex. Edward was also the victim of a successful conspiracy that resulted in his assassination in 986. Edward's brother, Richard the Fearless, inherited the throne of England in 986. Richard's reign was marked by civil war and unrest. He faced a number of challenges, including a rebellion in Mercia, a Viking invasion of northern England, and a civil war in Wessex. Richard was also the victim of a successful conspiracy that resulted in his assassination in 1006. Richard's son, Edmund Ironside, inherited the throne of England in 1006. Edmund's reign was marked by civil war and unrest. He faced a number of challenges, including a rebellion in Mercia, a Viking invasion of northern England, and a civil war in Wessex. Edmund was also the victim of a successful conspiracy that resulted in his assassination in 1016. With Edmund's death, the male line of Egbert came to an end. The next heir to the English throne was a Danish nobleman named Canute the Great, who had married Edmund's sister Emma. Despite his Danish origins, Canute was able to secure the throne of England and unite it with his own kingdom of Denmark. Canute's reign marked the beginning of the Danish conquest of England. Over the next few decades, Danish kings would hold the throne of England for much of the time. The Danish conquest of England had a profound impact on the English language, culture, and society. The Danes introduced a new legal system, a new way of doing business, and a new style of warfare to England. They also brought with them a new language, which gradually replaced Old English as the dominant language of England. In 1035, Canute's son, Harthacnut, inherited the throne of England. Harthacnut's reign was marked by civil war and unrest. He faced a number of challenges, including a rebellion in Mercia, a Viking invasion of northern England, and a civil war in Wessex. Harthacnut was also the victim of a successful conspiracy that resulted in his assassination in 1042. With Harthacnut's death, the throne of England passed to his younger brother, Edward the Confessor. Edward's reign was marked by relative peace and stability. He faced a number of challenges, including a rebellion in Mercia, a Viking invasion of northern England, and a civil war in Wessex. Edward was also the victim of a successful conspiracy that resulted in his assassination in 1066. Edward's cousin, Harold Godwinson, inherited the throne of England in 1066. Harold's reign lasted only 3 weeks. In 1066, he faced a Norman invasion of England led by William, Duke of Normandy. The resulting battle, known as the Battle of Hastings, was a decisive victory for William, who became the new King of England. With William's victory at Hastings, the Anglo-Saxon era of English history came to an end. The Normans who had invaded England were descended from the Vikings, who had settled in northern France in the 9th century. As such, the Norman conquest of England marked the beginning of the Viking Age in England. Over the next few decades, the Normans would impose their language, customs, and way of life on the English people. The Norman conquest also had a profound impact on the English language, culture, and society. The Normans introduced a new legal system, a new way of doing business, and a new style of warfare to England. They also brought with them a new language, which gradually replaced Old English as the dominant language of England. In 1087, William the Conqueror died and was succeeded by his son, William Rufus. William Rufus was a controversial figure. He was known for his cruelty and his lust for power. William Rufus was also responsible for the construction of the Tower of London, which was originally built as a palace and a fortress. In 1100, William Rufus was succeeded by his brother, Henry the Serm. Henry I's reign was marked by relative peace and stability. He faced a number of challenges, including a rebellion in Ireland, a Viking invasion of northern England, and a civil war in France. Henry I was also the victim of a successful conspiracy that resulted in his death in 1135.